Hello, dear all my lovely students. Welcome back to the channel Sonakshi at NEET Biology World. Today's topic of discussion is from breathing and exchange of gases. The topic will be transport of oxygen. Transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide is very important. It is conceptual. Each and every point which I will discuss today is important. If you understand the topic, if you have all the ideas, you can definitely give the answer in upcoming NEET. Okay, so let's discuss each and every point. You please note down, revise, then conceptually it should be very clear. Okay, let's discuss about transport of oxygen. Now, oxygen transport, we know that from lungs, oxygen will be transported through hemoglobin to the tissues. So there are actually two ways of transportation. So ways of transportation will be by two ways. First is by oxyhemoglobin. And second, by dissolving in plasma. What is the amount? Maximum amount means 97% will be transported by oxyhemoglobin and by plasma only 3%. By plasma, only one point is important, as oxygen is sparingly soluble, means it not easily soluble in water. Only 3% will be transported through plasma. Maximum amount 97% will be transported. That detail we will discuss. Now we know that 1 gram, this important data, 1 gram of hemoglobin can bind 1.3 ml of oxygen. Now we know that 100 ml of blood will have 15 gram on an average of hemoglobin. So 100 ml of blood can bind with 15 into 1.3, actually it is 1.34, so almost it is 20 ml. Now 20 ml, the blood cannot transport to the tissue. Only 20 to 25% of the oxygen or total oxygen which is bound into the hemoglobin, that will be transported to the tissue. So here we can write 25% of 20 ml. 25% of 20 ml means only 5 ml of oxygen will be transported to tissue per 100 ml of blood. Very important data. Okay. For oxygen it is 5 ml, for carbon dioxide it is 4 ml. Okay. Now we will let's discuss about the oxygen hemoglobin complex or oxyhemoglobin, how it forms, and we have to know about the structure of hemoglobin, right? So let's discuss. So you can see here hemoglobin is a quaternary protein. It has 2 alpha chain and 2 beta chain, which is blue in color, alpha chain which is purple in color. Now at the center of each subunit there is a group which is called heme, and at the center of the heme group there will be iron. You can see here iron in the +2 or ferrous state, right? So here this iron can bind with oxygen. So here in each hemoglobin molecule there are 4 iron. So 4 iron can bind with maximum 4 oxygen. So here we can write the equation that Hb4 plus 4O2 equals to Hb4O8, or simply you can write Hb plus O2 HbO2. So each molecule of hemoglobin can bind 4 oxygen maximum. Now, if one oxygen bound to hemoglobin, we will call that 25% saturated. And if two oxygen bound to hemoglobin, we will call 50% saturated. Okay. So here, this percent saturation, how many oxygen will bind to the hemoglobin, that depends on the partial pressure. Okay. So that depends on the partial pressure. So oxygen binding, or we can say oxygen saturation, depends on partial pressure. Now what is partial pressure? Partial pressure is nothing but the pressure exerted by a single gas in a gas mixture. As air contains like oxygen, nitrogen, all the components are there. That's why we will use the term partial pressure. Okay, so it depends on the partial pressure. We know that in alveoli, the partial pressure of oxygen is 95. In deoxygenated blood, it is 40. If you check in NCERT, the table is given, and this table is very important also. So the oxygen will be transported by hemoglobin from high pressure or high partial pressure to low partial pressure. So here, this binding, I mean the saturation, also depends on the partial pressure of the gas. Here it is oxygen. Now, as I told, Fe plus 2 can bind with oxygen, and this binding, it is oxygenation, and it is reversible, and it is not oxidation. I will write here, not oxidation. Why it is required reversibility? Because see, in the lungs, if the oxygen will bind to the hemoglobin in tissue, it has to release the oxygen. I mean the hemoglobin has to release the oxygen. So that the oxygen will be utilized by the tissues. So it will be reversible binding. Okay. Now this Fe, sometimes some gas, for example ozone, which is an environmental pollutant, it can oxidize the hemoglobin, means that plus 2 ferrous will be converted plus 3, and this kind of hemoglobin will be called methemoglobin. Okay, so I will write here Fe plus 3, this called methemoglobin. And who can do? Environmental pollutants. Environmental pollutants like ozone. Okay. So that's how the oxygen will bind. Coming to now, oxygen saturation and partial pressure has a relationship, and this relationship will be explained by oxygen dissociation curve. The curve which is displayed here, it is oxygen dissociation curve. What is the nature of the curve? It is sigmoid curve. Okay, so sigmoid. Now think that if the partial pressure will increase, the saturation also will increase. So why it is not linear? Why it is sigmoid? It is due to the cooperative binding of oxygen towards hemoglobin. Cooperative binding means, suppose in a molecule of hemoglobin, if one molecule of oxygen binds, then this will lead to the more affinity of oxygen towards the hemoglobin. Means second molecule of oxygen will bind to the hemoglobin more easily or quicker. So this kind of binding will be called as cooperative binding, and that's why it is sigmoid. So due to cooperative binding of oxygen to hemoglobin, that's why it is not straight, it is sigmoid. What is the benefit for that? Benefit is that when there is very low oxygen amount or partial pressure is very low, when will go towards mountain or to the mountain, at that time partial pressure of oxygen is very low, but oxygen saturation will not be hampered if we do not go much higher, right? So within a limit, it can have a cooperative binding. It can maintain its saturation. So let's discuss about oxygen saturation curve or oxygen dissociation curve. The plot is, in this x-axis it will be partial pressure, in y-axis it will be hemoglobin saturation. Now, if the curve shifts towards the right side, means I am talking about this one. This one. If the curve shifts towards the right side, what does it mean? And if the curve shifts towards left side, what does it mean? If the curve shifts towards right side, let's say in this point, I mean when the percent saturation is 60. When the percent saturation is 60, let's say. Now at 60, when it will be there at 38 like this, right? So at 38 partial pressure of oxygen, it will be 60. But if the graph shifts towards right side, to get 60 saturation, the partial pressure has to be increased above 40. That means at high partial pressure, we are getting the same percent saturation. That means the affinity is going to decrease. I mean, the affinity, the binding affinity of oxygen towards the hemoglobin will decrease. Opposite to that, if it shifts to the left side, then the affinity of oxygen to bind to the hemoglobin will increase, right? Now, which condition will help to decrease the affinity, to shift the curve to the right side? Decrease affinity means the dissociation of oxygen from hemoglobin will be very easy. Where it is required? In the tissue. So tissue conditions, remember that the tissue conditions always lead to the decrease of affinity. What are the tissue conditions? Like, first of all, temperature. We know that lungs will have ventilation. The temperature will be low in compared to tissue. So high temperature. In tissue, there will be constant production of carbon dioxide. High PCO2 means partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Then low pH. As carbon dioxide production is more, then we know that we will discuss that in the next class, that there will be formation of carbonic acid. Carbonic acid can dissociate to bicarbonate and H+. So H+ will be high, right? So low pH, high H plus means low pH. So in the low pH, high PCO2, low PO2 and high temperature will favor the carb to shift to right side, means affinity will decrease. Another one very important, which is called 2,3-DPG. 2,3-DPG is, 2,3-diphospho or bisphosphoglycerate. It is an intermediate which will form in the glycolysis. Remember that, think that if in the cell there is glycolysis, the product is pyruvate and it will go into the Krebs cycle, so more oxygen is required. That means affinity should decrease, right? So there will be more availability of oxygen. This 2,3-DPG, if the concentration raises, then it will help to decrease the affinity of oxygen towards the hemoglobin, so that the carb will shift right side. And just opposite to that, lung condition. In lungs, when the oxygen will bind to the hemoglobin, at this condition, this all the condition which will be there in the lungs will favor the association of oxygen with hemoglobin, means the curve will shift to the left side. Okay, so what is this? This decreased temperature means low temperature. In lungs there will be low carbon dioxide because oxygen will be more, right? So low carbon dioxide, anyway, 2,3-DPG, 2,3-DPG, pH, high pH. So all condition which is there in the lungs, it will favor to association or for the association of oxygen with hemoglobin, means the curve will shift to the left side. Remember that. Okay, so tissue condition will make the curve to shift to the right side, and lung condition which make the curve to shift to the right side. Now another important factor or the information I want to tell you, that what will be the curve for myoglobin, fetal hemoglobin and normal hemoglobin. Now I told that sigmoid curve means cooperative binding, but for myoglobin, if you see here, for myoglobin the graph is straight, it is not sigmoid, the red color graph. So for myoglobin, there is no cooperative binding, and the affinity of oxygen to hemoglobin is higher than adult hemoglobin. You can see here the curve shifted to the left side, so affinity increases. Coming to fetal hemoglobin also has very higher affinity to oxygen. It will have a lower, it will not have a lower affinity, it will have a higher affinity. So as it is, you can see here, it is the normal one. It is the normal hemoglobin, means this curve is the normal, and fetal hemoglobin curve is on the left side, but both are sigmoid. So here we can conclude that fetal hemoglobin will have more oxygen association power or oxygen affinity towards hemoglobin, and with compared to adult hemoglobin. Okay, these are very important points. As I discussed, you should have crystal clear concept. If you want more and more videos like that, you keep watching and do like, share and subscribe. Thank you all.